Hello, everyone. This talk is about human error and how we should look at it from a different perspective. So just a little presentation. I've been in the IT world in a number of roles for the past 18 years. I'm a co-organizer of the DevOps Lisbon Meetup. We also hold monthly meetups, so please join us someday. And I'm also co-organizing the first DevOps Days conference in Portugal. DevOps Days is the original DevOps conference, so it will be held in June. The call for papers is open, so give it a shot. So, what do you think is the favorite journalist question after an accident? What is the main thing that we have to answer? No. Oh, yes, that's a good one. How many Portuguese? It doesn't matter the other ones. So, but a very common one is, well, there's a human error and the accident was blamed and it was caused by a poor human, so that's solved. And for instance, I don't know if you remember a few years back that horrible train crash in Galiza. And the official finding says that that crash was exclusively responsible of the train driver. So the train driver was distracted. He was going too fast. The plane crashed. Lots and lots of people died. And so the problem was the train driver. So remember, if you are traveling in a fast train, you have to really, really trust that train driver, because if he gets distracted in the wrong place, nothing can help you, okay? So the disaster will probably happen again sometime in the future because people get distracted and they aren't robots and they can't be just fully concentrated every second of their work. A few years back, and this is quite common, there are some outages and some of them get on the news, and if you search for those outages in Google or something, most of the time you'll see something like this: human error, Amazon broke the internet with a typo, so that one guy just did something horrible, and if we could just remove that guy, everything would be perfect. So the thing is, for every complex problem, there is always an answer that is clear, it's simple, but it's wrong. And we must remember that at all times. One other example, I really love these things. Also, a couple of years back or something, Night Capital basically went bankrupt in 30 minutes. They lost $400 million in 30 minutes. And it was such a serious problem that other financial companies had to step in, or that failure could cause a systemic shock in the financial world, at least in the American financial world. And what was the problem? One of the nice technicians during a deployment did something wrong. And so things just went bonkers. Equifax also, they have Infonet, 100 million consumers. Hackers expose lots of personal data for 140 million users. And, well, the former, and that's important, the former Equifax CEO says that breach boiled down to one person not doing their job. So it's pretty common, and even in our daily life, to when there's a problem, one of the first questions that we have is, who done it? Who done it? But the thing is, it's proven time and again that we cannot just attribute an accident to a single cause or to a single individual. And especially in our world, which is very complex, this is never the case. So, we cannot simply remove humans from the process. They are part of the process, and at least for a few more years, I'd say they are the intelligent part of the system. Okay, not the machines, but humans. So they are needed. They have to be there. They are the ones who solve the problems. And what is a complex domain? So if it's dynamic, it's always changing in a non-linear way. If there's lots of parts and connections between those parts, if there's lots of uncertainty, for instance, we cannot fully understand how the system works because we may have incomplete data, missing information, or too much information, or difficulty to find that information, which causes uncertainty on how the system works. And if there's risk, if we have to consider that one of our actions can have a catastrophic effect, even a small one, and we have to think about that risk, then we are in a complex domain. And basically, IT systems are complex domains always, as you probably agree. So when we are dealing with these complex domains, there are some things that we have to take into account. It's easy for us to get fixated on our initial analysis, and then new data can come up, but we get fixated on that initial analysis, and that make us take more time to solve the problem. It's very difficult for us to deal with exponential developments. If things are moving too fast and they are moving like this and changing like this, we tend to think that things are changing like this. So it's difficult for us to deal with that kind of change. We also, in the middle of a crisis or in the middle of the incident, it's quite common to start discussing before the problem is solved, how should we have prevented that problem and what we have to do after the problem is solved. But we must put that away and we have to fix the problem first and then discuss all that stuff. It's also very easy for us, especially in the middle of an incident, there's so many things happening, and we think, well, I have to try this, and this may be the cause, but in the middle of the storm, we can just forget about it, and then afterwards, when the problem is solved, we think about, well, 5 minutes ago, or 10 minutes ago, or 30 minutes ago, I thought that this might be the problem, but then it just went away from our mind. It's also very common to treat interconnected events as independent. So for instance, we deploy something in the user's API, for instance, and that may cause the checkout process to fail. And we don't believe that things are connected. It's very common when we do a deployment, something breaks, and we don't believe that the deployment caused the failure. Because we usually tend to think in causal series, so A causes B, causes C, but the way things happen, it's not in a series, it's in nets. A causes B, which causes C, which can also cause B, which can cause E, so it's very difficult to understand. And we also have, especially if we are dealing with a system for a bit of time, we can be over-reliant on our experience and ignore what evidence the system is showing us, and we can get fixated, oh, this is the symptom, it must be that problem. The site is slow, it must be the database again. Okay, and we just ignore the evidence that show us that probably that's not the cause. But that's because we are humans and that's the way our mind works, okay? So until a few years ago, and it still happens, there was something that academia says that it's the old view of human error. So basically the systems are safe, humans are the ones who can break things, so we have to put away humans because they are the problem, okay? And in the 19th century, things were quite simple. Some factories came along, and the formatter company came along, and there was a theory that I believe it still has some followers nowadays, which is the scientific method, okay, by Taylor. And Taylorism is a very famous approach to solving things. And I couldn't resist, and I had to put this slide. So Taylor, which was hugely influential in the way we think, said in his landmark book, said, well, one of the very first requirements for a man who is fit to handle pig iron as a regular occupation is that he shall be so stupid and so phlegmatic that he more nearly resembles in his mental makeup the ox than any other type. And this was hugely influential. And when we think in dividing labor and creating silos, which is very common still nowadays, this is influenced by Taylorism. So we can divide tasks, and if we divide the tasks and get humans to do it, they just have to follow a few simple rules, and we don't have to take advantage of the brains that we have. So we have moved on, but we are nearly near where we have to be. Because when things happen, when bad things happen, it's very, very easy to start to point fingers and find scapegoats and solve the problem in that way. But the thing is that we are humans, we are not objective, and we have to be careful, and we have to think things through if we want to prevent them from reoccurring, and if we want to improve. And some things that we have to take into account when you are looking into an accident. So the first one is the hindsight bias. So it's extremely easy, once things happened, to look back and very easily point out, well, they should have done this, and they should have done this. It's obvious that they have done this error. How could that be? But, well, that's easy because we have all the data. We know what the problem was, so it's very easy. It's like when I was a child, I don't know if you did that also, but I always started from the end and went backwards, and it was very easy for me to find the way out, okay? And that's what we do when we are analyzing accidents. Very often, we just look back, and it's very easy to see the path, okay? But that's not what the people who are trying to solve things, they don't have that information, okay? There's also the fundamental attribution error, which basically says, when I mess up, the problem is not mine, it's the circumstances, the context. When other people are involved in an accident, well, that's their problem. They are unprofessional, they don't know how to solve stuff, and this is very, very, very common, even if not so explicitly as I'm telling right now, but this is very common. When we are involved in it, we find all kinds of reasons for the things happening the way they happened. When there are other people, especially if they are not working with us and we don't know them very well, it's very easy to say, how can they work like that? And if we really trust in a system, especially if we are involved in building it, and something bad happens, usually it's easier to put blames on people, not on the system, and think, well, the system is perfectly fine, those people have to move, okay? There's also the counterfactuals, which are not very helpful when we are thinking about what went wrong and how can we improve. And this is basically constantly happening. We very, very commonly think when we are looking back, well, if we have done this or that, we could have prevented something. But the issue is when we think in these terms, if we have done something that did not happen, it doesn't explain why people have done what they've done, why people in the middle of the accident chose to do those actions. Okay, because we are talking about something that did not happen, so it doesn't help to move on. And one secondary effect is that counterfactuals, even for ourselves, have a tendency to bring some emotions that are not conducive to improving things. So regret, guilt, and sometimes relief. So, what can we do? First off, we have to think about one principle that is really, really crucial to understand things, and it's the local rationality principle. And basically, unless people have some mischievous intentions, if people want to do good, and they usually do, people do things that make sense to them given their goals, their understanding of the situation, and their focus of attention at that time, okay? They don't do stupid things just because they want to, just because they are unprofessional. No, they do things because it made sense to them given their context, okay? And that their context is very different from ours when we are looking back. So that local decision at the time, we have to have the assumption that it was right, it made sense for them. And we have to understand why it made sense for them. And accidents happen for normal people who are doing normal things. And sometimes things break. But they are doing normal things in their day-to-day life, and sometimes things break. So can we find the cause? Well, we cannot find the cause, and this is very important. When something bad happens, when an accident happens, it's impossible to find the cause. So, this is a book, if you are interested in this kind of stuff, this is a wonderful book. It's by Snook, who is, I believe, a military, and he was under friendly fire in Panama. And a few years after, there was an accident in Iraq where some American F-15s shot down a Black Hawk, which is an helicopter, and they were in line of sight. And even then, the F-15s shot down the Black Hawk. And this obviously was very emotional for him because he was also under friendly fire and he wanted to understand what happened. And this is what he came up. So this is the shoot down, and he did a thorough investigation of everything that surrounded that accident. And well, basically he found all these causes, and he ended up in the changing world order and the fall of the Soviet Union. So he went really, really back. And it's very interesting because he writes in the book that he went to that investigation and he wanted to find who were the people responsible for that, what did they had done wrong, and in the end he said no one did anything wrong. So he said this accident happened because, or perhaps in spite of everyone behaving just the way we would expect them to behave, just the way theory would predict. And this shoot-down was a normal accident in a highly reliable organization. So we don't find the cause ever, because there's no one cause. We just have to stop somewhere and we have to select the cause that we want to deal with. And this is, I think this is quite profound. If you let this sink in, I think this is quite profound. So there's a new view on human error, which treats human error as a symptom of a failure of the system. So it's not necessarily that human who did something wrong. It's a symptom of the failure of the system. Safety is not built into systems and into our IT systems. And we have to understand things in this way. So the human error is connected to features of people's tools, tasks, and all the operating environment where the humans are working in. And this is probably, everyone knows this slide. So there are, Ron Westrom says, I don't know with how much scientific accuracy, but it's a nice handle to think about stuff. There are three types of organizations. There's the pathological, the bureaucratic, and the generative. And we want to be preferably over there. Okay? And if we want to be on that generative organization where things are discussed and things are improved, when we are looking at an accident, there are 4 needs that must be fulfilled. And we have to be aware of those 4 needs if we want to do a good job. So there is the epistemological, the preventive, the moral, and the existential. The epistemological is just a fancy word to say we have to establish what happened. Not why necessarily, but what happened. The preventive is the part of the analysis that says, how can we do better next time? The moral is, for instance, if we have, I don't know, doctors. Doctors, they have a code of conduct. There are some norms that they have to follow. And the action must also say, did this person follow the rules or not? Did they follow the good practices of the profession or not? And this is also a very important thing because people want to know this. And there's also the existential. I don't know, if a plane falls, we have to establish, well, is it safe to keep flying with the other planes, or is there a systemic error? Okay, and this is not something that we have to do by ourselves. It's just something that the society demands. Okay, we cannot, if a plane flies, or I don't know, if there's a breach in a bank and money is stolen, people will want to know, can we trust the system or not? So we have to answer that question. And the problem is that most of the time they are in conflict. So the preventive one and the moral and the existential ones, most of the time they are in conflict. Because here there's lots of politics, and then that can prevent people from understanding if what really happened and how can we prevent it. So if we focus mostly on the moral and the existential needs, and if we ignore the other ones, we'll start to create a blame culture, okay? And that blame culture, the fear that we can be punished for something, either it is real or just perceived, it's a terrible thing. Okay, so we have to understand that we have to also answer about moral and existential stuff, but we have to fight to get the epistemological and the preventive stuff first. Okay? Because learning from failure, and we so many times fail to learn from failure, okay, it's at least as important as those moral and existential needs. Because these ones are most commonly the most the easiest ones to explain, okay? And we just don't learn from failure, and then we are condemned ourselves to repeat the same things. So how can we try to approach this analysis and these accident reports? How can we do this more objectively? So there are 5 steps. The first step is to lay out the sequence of events. So we have to establish a timeline, what people were discussing, and we have to write down that kind of information in the context of that specific accident. So what actions did people do? What decisions did they do? At what times? what kind of behavior did they have, okay? If the accident unfolded over a long period, it may help to divide it into episodes. Okay, if it's a short one, no need for that. We then have to find out how the world looked. So in our IT systems, we have, for instance, lots of logs, lots of metrics. It's important to gather those metrics to understand how accessible they were and to understand if they were useful for what was happening or not. So basically, gather all those metrics and all those logs that might help to understand, to fully understand the accident. Then we have to couple the first step, what people decide to do, what they did in the timeline, couple with the data that you gather from the logs, and try to understand what kind of, how people use that data to understand, to make those decisions, to understand which data were they looking for, because even if there's lots of data available, lots of metrics, people don't look for all that metrics. They focus on specific ones. And we have to understand if they use the most useful data or not. Was the most useful data accessible or was not? If they chose to look for the wrong data, why? Because they looked for that metric or for that log for one reason, and we have to try to understand why so that we can improve. And finally, we have to try to get that accident, get all that data from that accident that is specific for that accident, and try to find if there's a pattern that you can use to improve things further in the future. Okay? So this is it. I hope this helps. I hope that you go back to your organization and make it more humane and a bit more resilient. Okay, so thank you. And just a quick notice is, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, Lund University, which is a Swedish university, has a program around this stuff. They have some info available online. It's really, really interesting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, João.